So another year's done, and I read a decent amount again. I'm kind of changing how I rate things. I'm not sure if I ever got around to uploading how I set these conditions up, but basically the first batch will go through them more objectively, and then I'll put what I had most fun with, and then another one that was places like on their highest point. So basically what has the highest impact or has the best route, even though the rest is kind of mediocre. I technically almost finished Soukoku last year. I was finishing some missing routes. It's basically just SMT, but in general the cast gets transported to like a different place that demons and angels are fighting over for. They're just trying to survive and trying to get back to their own world. And it's like, it's fine. I'd probably put this one of the weakest usually titles I've read, but a large part of that is because how they handle the routes. There's 3 factions, and in those factions there's the character routes. So once you beat the final boss, you see the faction ending and then the character ending. You also get to transfer over your progress from more cards. So you're technically playing through this like 9 times. And this also assumes you're doing everything right because there's faction specific CG that you can be missed as well, instead of kind of annoying. The gameplay swaps from the usual grid-based strategy RPG to a card game, and it's a breath of fresh air. Really, your deck only expands after New Game Plus. Sure, there's some gimmick builds you can start with, but it's pretty shallow until you can buy character cards after the New Game Plus plot, or have the MC card with like higher control. The plot in the Devil faction route is pretty ass, but it's also the only place outside of New Game Plus to get like the better cards for your different decks. And it's like, yeah, you can go for Devil first, but then the whole experience kind of sucks. And also the last boss is probably a lot harder than the Angel route as well, so it's like, it's kind of, what do you want to get screwed over, right? A lot of the issues stem from the repetitiveness if you want to like 100% it, since the new content per run is like maybe 5%. A lot of the routes are also kind of mid, and there's others where, yeah, the route is fine or maybe also mid, but their card is OP, so you might want to do it first just to get it. I'm putting this like a 6, but it can be jumped to like a 7 if you only do like one sequence of the Angel, Human, and then the New Game Plus. The New Game Plus route is actually more like a low 8, but each faction has their own moments. Hokejo is actually a great VN that I just can't recommend because of the age scenes. The MC has a job or something to guide spirits back to their own like spiritual cycle. There's a lot of factions, but the one he's in is the only one that tries to do it peacefully. He basically only took the job because he thinks his sister's a spirit somewhere around the world and he doesn't want any of the other factions to get to her first, so he's trying to get through this town that the VN is based on. So there's like 3 or 4 subplots circling around whilst he's doing his own thing. There's a part in the middle that drags on, but overall the pacing is great. It starts great, it has a couple great resolutions, but the last 10 minutes or so went back to really being fucked up to me. There's actually another title in here that has like a similar ending, but it was actually done well or not creepy. This is also one of those VNs where it felt like it had 3 endings, but this time around it's like the first 2 endings were actually done really well. It's like, oh shit, the third ending is the creepy one. It's like, alright. Snow is pretty much a key title, and it's pretty funny in like in a 90s comedy sort of way. The common route is the best part, and that's basically just due to them goofing around while you're helping out with the inn. They left all the drama in the routes, right? Some of the routes are kind of ass, but the big thing is that you can basically give 2 scores depending if you read Snow or Snow Plus that has 2 more routes. One of the new routes was basically much unnecessary, and it's more that the overall flow to the original ending is just done better. So OG Snow is closer to a low 8, and the expansion puts it to like a 7, and that's still kind of nice, I guess. If you're not a fan of the humor, then drop it like another point or 2. Future Radio had a lot of potential, but just kind of flops in the true route, and that's kind of fine if you look at it like a mindset of cyanotype being better, so it's like a gradual process of getting better with each title. The common route and the teachers are still pretty good on their own. It's just basically just a title about being screwed over by humanity's own inventions. They made a new communication network and it went haywire, so now all communication is dead because it keeps getting intercepted or just being consumed. It's like, oh, it's an interesting plot, it just, the true route is kind of ass. The first Aokana Extra is kind of what I want in most fan discs. A while ago I was writing something about like how varied fan discs can be and how some of them are pretty much ass, but I scrapped it because like I just don't want to do it. Generally some end up being like what ifs or pseudo sequels, some are actual like just fan service, and some of them are just expansions and just handle like the rest of the cast that never got a route. Then there's stuff like this one where it's just giving one character that you already had like another 4 hours of screen time while also showing like the whole gang, because that's normally not a thing either. Just there's a decent chunk where the MC isn't even present and it's just the rest of the cast helping her out. I wish fan discs were handled more like this more often, but usually it's just like just fan service, it gets boring. And it's usually like fan service on the one character that's already liked is like, oh great. But you know, everything's just marketing, so what can you do? which leads to the Making Lovers fan disc that also has like 2 to maybe 3 hours that holds all 5 after stories that also includes like 2 H scenes each. The times where they're goofing around is still fun, but it's really short. I don't know why they went this route. Everybody I saw talking about this is always about the comedy. Either they find it funny or just find it cringy and they don't like it that way, but maybe in Japan people really like the H scenes, I don't know. I don't have no idea why they were so long compared to the actual comedy. And that leads to Biman 2.5, where it pretty much is just a 2-hour porn game, right? It's fine. It loses a lot of what made the first one fun. The art is still great, but you can tell this is like intermission between the actual titles. It's good for what it is, and it has a pretty good scene halfway through, but overall you just hear like, she looks hot, I want to go through some H scenes, and that's it. Tokyo Necro is actually a lot of fun. It's just a gang of people killing what's basically zombies for money. It had issues in there, but a decent bit of it is basically how they wrote Ethica. It was either 50-50 shot of either liking her or finding her intolerable. It just varies a lot where some parts are amazing, other parts could have been just ripped out. I think Kansu's route was the best one out of the 4 routes, and the other ones still have hype moments that can make them great, but it was just not consistently good like this one is. I actually wrote about Eiyu Senki, but I never pushed it out. It's basically like someone just rolled you like some gacha, and then now you go around conquering every new place to unify the land because some evil shit is happening around and you're trying to stop that. It had a lot of promise at the start, but it kept decreasing with every new faction. There's still sparks of fun throughout it, but it doesn't know when to end, to the point that I was just having a bad time with their constant, and then this shows up, and now you fight this, and like, holy shit, just end. It really was a quantity over quality type of thing, and honestly it's understandable, but that doesn't mean the scores won't get lowered because of it. There's actually still a lot of fun characters. I think each character at least gets 4 scenes each, that's fine. Just in the main campaign they're not around, and it's like you could have just incorporated like conditions into it too. And a lot of it is just like so many, it's like 4 fake endings or something. It's like, holy crap, can you just stop? Ashen Hawk is a loose sequel to Black Butterfly. Technically more stuff gets unlocked after you finish the normal path, and that resolves the rest from the first title. Ashen Hawk starts interesting, but it takes forever to leave the exposition canyon in chapter 2. It's holy shit, I think it's like 3 chapters long. The characters are weaker than in the first one, but overall it's still a fun time, but it's not something I'd push people to read. I'd enjoyed some of the endings. They weren't really original, but one of them was uncommon enough that I was like, oh, this is always fun to see. Basically, the whole premise is like Town of Salem, but it's not really carried the same way it usually is. Basically, her eye can turn red depending on her emotions. It's a natural indication of the witch, so he just hidden as the guy, and that's kind of his whole thing. She wants like leave town and crap, but she needs money, so she takes his job to find like this other artifact crap, and that's pretty much what's going around, to the point then a lot of shit happens. And you know, I think it's like 8 chapters long. It's still interesting. After, like I said, after the first couple routes, there's a whole new path that explains everything else from the first title, and it's great. I liked it a lot. It's still more like a 6 or a 7. Kunado is kind of weird because I really liked the first comment section with Yuri, and that included her route, but then it kind of tapered off for me. There was still interesting sections going on, but I wasn't really a fan of the overall content between the 2 other routes. They're still fine to have their like hype moments, but if I had to say what was the best part, it'd be when Yuri was the focus. You're just that guy that woke up and ended up being like a millennium ahead, and out of nowhere basically there's like no tech, and there's these mechanical beings that kept destroying their civilizations, but now everybody has like magical powers, and the strongest ones can be this elite faction, and that's where you're set up. And the whole thing's like, how can we like make civilization grow again? It's like, all right, it's fine. But it's fine for what it is. It's kind of generic at times, but you're really here if you're just like one of the characters. It's not really about the plot, I guess. Not to say that the plot is like completely passable. There's just a lot better titles for that. You're just a sorcerer that tries to keep the humans and the spirits balanced, basically trying not to piss them off and settle their disputes. The true ending was pretty fun, even though you can see where it was going in the common route. Really, I just bought this because Hanako was there, and I like the route too, so it's great for me. Ars Magna was more that I just wanted to try a Nine Tails title at one point, but I also didn't really want to deal with tentacles at all. A lot of them have like very specific kinks, and I'm just not into that. I think I've seen like, oh yeah, this title is kind of worse than a lot of the other titles, and hopefully that's the case, because I was kind of bored at times outside of like the finale where it randomly turned up like a couple notches. There's also a chaos route, but it's terrible, and it doesn't really give you any nuance because anything that can be gleaned from that is already in the normal route anyway. There was some interesting sections, but overall it was just way too long for my liking, especially when there's a lot of parts or a lot of maps where you have to repeat, and it's like, why am I back here again? It's holy shit. I started Phenogram like ages ago, where the only tale was like some guy on YouTube playing it as on his Xbox, and I only got to the end of like the first story, so I was kind of pumped to finish the rest. Like, hey, I like that one, I remember it. Too bad the first story was basically the best thing out of it. There's a couple that I had fun with, but overall it's one of those titles where I'm wondering what was the point outside of like maybe 4 stories, and that's because it explains a little bit of the main thing as well. And it's like, this was fine, I guess. I even like the Darling fan this better because even then that was like very specific to be fan service, and I like this, like, art's fine. This one's like, it felt like it was trying to do things, like what was the point? Nukitashi is probably my controversial one. I wasn't really a huge fan of the title, but a lot of it was mainly on the first route. There's a lot of wishy-washy going on with the tone where it tries to be serious at times, but then it goes back to doing like porn jokes. It's kind of funny here and there, but it gets tiring and reminds me of the guy who made a funny joke and then just ran into the ground for the next few days and I just want to go home. Masaki was actually pretty fun because it didn't really try to be serious at all. It was just balls to the walls crazy, so I never had expectations of anything else. Like, hey, I had a fun time. I just kind of shut it off my brain. Overall, I had fun with it, but I just had a lot of things that I could nitpick, but generally the tonal whiplash is like a huge pet peeve of mine. The finale is actually pretty fun too. Basically, you're pretty much forced to go back to your old town that's based on this island, but the town forces everybody to go bang people they're into, and they're all down for it. It's like, yeah, and the whole thing is like, you guys don't want to, so you're trying to find ways to avoid it alongside trying to dismantle the system, and then it goes back and forth with it. Even if you're like, hey, am I actually the good guy, or am I just as bad as the other people? And it's like, it's interesting in a very like rudimentary level. There could be a lot more going on and it wasn't. And maybe I missed a few things out on, but for me it's like, yeah, it's a plot you can go. It's interesting because it doesn't happen a lot, but overall, the best thing I can say is like, oh, this isn't generic. And that's like the best thing it has going for it. Loopers is like 4 hours long and it's kind of funny in the sense that they have to rush a lot of things to make it work, but it's written by like Rio 7 that loves to elongate things like crazy. So it's like the tiger versus dragon theme. The title is just a date that's constantly looping. I can't really talk much about it because it's only 4 hours long and anything is basically a spoiler. But the whole thing is like everybody's trying to have like doing some fun shit in the one day and a lot of them just doing shenanigans, but the older guys are already getting bored of it, so now the new guys are trying to like find new things they never did and have like let them have fun one more time. So now there's, they're trying to do that and also trying to get out of the loop, and that's it. Piofiore is just a mafia-based otome. It's fine. You're going to have the most fun with like the first 2 routes, but eventually it gets kind of tiring because a lot of it is just rather similar. I still quite liked it, but there's a sequel and I'm not sure if I have it in me to read another 50-hour VN based on these characters. Nicola, Yang, and Gilbert were the fun ones, and I think it still continues on. It's like, holy shit, why does it have another one? Inochi no Spare is kind of a simple concept of the main girl being terminally ill that has a way out, but she doesn't want to take it. Basically, she has to take her sister's heart. The sister wants to do it, but the main character wants the sister to live on. It can work, but it tries to put too many story points in there alongside the main guy taking a large portion of the screen time. So it would have been better if the plot either revolved around the sisters and their drama, or their romantic relationship and the drama that comes from that. Putting them all in like 8 hours just didn't work out. Even then, the ending was fine, and I think a lot of people like it just because of that. The Tsukihime Remake is kind of a weird one to score because you can look at it in 2 ways. In terms of a remake for the first 2 routes, it was done fairly well. There's some bloat in Seal's route, and I wasn't a huge fan of how they handled the new ending, but the foundation is solid compared to before. So as a remake, I can see it something like a 9, but in terms of like just Tsukihime in general, what makes it stand out was the other 3 routes that just aren't included in this remake. So you can even consider like, oh, it's a 7 because like the best parts aren't here. But I'm putting it as 8 because yeah, it's still solid. It's just not what I wanted. Jeanne is amazing and I put it as a 9. It's funny because what's great about it is more on the flow and how everybody interacts with each other than the plot. The plot is actually really basic. Really, the voice acting kind of hard carries what the characters are going for, and I'd even put it as like a 10 if it wasn't for the repetition needed to fully complete all the routes. I consider this more of like a mood piece. I had a lot of fun with it. Suino Stella is fine, the setup is done well, the main character is understandably annoying at first, but she grows on you and she naturally develops like throughout the segments. The latter half is a lot more enjoyable. I'm putting this close to a 7, but I imagine most people put it as an 8 more often than not. A lot of it is just like, oh, the ending is well done. It had a couple things going for it, but the first 2 hours was kind of a chore to go through, and that's mostly what's represented in the synopsis. I was having more fun when you get into the 3rd segment where the plot finally picks up. If you want another VN that revolves around summer or how it felt to explore during vacation, then it's better to look somewhere else. The first 2 hours felt more like a checklist of stuff they had to go through just to have all the setup for the rest of the VN. It's kind of boring. Felt like they want to write about everything else except this, and yeah, it does show because the 2nd segment does have some more foundation for the 3rd segment. 3rd segment, it's like the true route and it works really well. I wasn't really a fan of the first one. Sure, it sets up the foundation, but everything in the court cases felt too simplified, which can work if you're trying to focus more on the story instead of the gameplay, but the amount of plot that happens is pretty minimal in the first one, so I don't know what they're going for. The second one was a lot better, the plot picks up, and the gameplay is more of a happy middle ground between like baby level of the first one and the occasional leaps of logic from the original like trilogy. So overall, I had a lot of fun with the second one. I don't really want a sequel to this one, it's better just make it like another branch off of something else and just have it again. I got Clover Days because the synopsis made it look a lot better than what it actually is. At first I was hoping for something like Yotsunoha but done right, but it's basically the same if not a little worse at some points, except the voice acting kind of hard carries the VN compared to Yotsunoha. Premise was basically a fake out and it's something that you can write out in an hour. They made a promise, they came back, and now the promise is back on. It's like, wow, holy shit, nothing actually happened. There's a lot of things where it's like, hey, now we're changing the past thing and I hate when that happens. Like, holy, can't you just make something better? This title is great for people that dislike heavy drama. Half the time it's just them goofing around. There are drama segments and they shine due to the voice actors, but they kind of consist of maybe like 5% of the VN. The twins are the worst route, and there's a route that has like a supporting character that overshadows the main character in there. She had nothing going on after the confession anyway, so I guess it's fine. I liked it a lot actually. When it spikes up, it's great. I think for a lot of other people, or like people that just want like a moe game, this is great for them. This would be like, oh man, this is like a 9. But for me, that, you know, I was looking at the premise, I was looking at the synopsis, like, oh, this might be having a lot more shit going on in the back, and nothing was there, and it pissed me off. So I almost want to put it as a 5 just to be petty, but no, it's not. It's not bad. It's a decent read anyway. It's just not for me. And then just Hira, I think it's written rather well, to the point it can probably just be considered literature. It's a 2+ system, and the interesting one is about this doctor that's working with these patients that have like a mix of like dementia and super lupus combo. NWA is written by Shogo, like a few others. He has a specific style and you either like it or not. The stories either take forever to finish, or in this case, might never finish, but what you have is like a decent foundation to the world and a great slap of crude 90s humor if you're into that. It's a lot better than Going One, but still has the issues of almost actually nothing happening. It's a great start for a trilogy where it sets up the cities and the other important regions alongside like the antagonist's forces on them. Overall, it's fun, but you don't know if it's ever going to be finished or not. This list is more based on genre, so some titles can be pretty generic, but it's completely serviceable and fine. So something like Clover Days, where it's like, yeah, it's really not for me, but hey, for what it is, like you want a moe game, it works fine. If the title kind of subverts expectations, then it gets the bumps. And this one is mainly like the Aokana fan disc. This one is based on impact. Generally it's based on the severity of the impact, but sometimes it just gets bumps if there's a lot of them throughout the title. So Jacques Jeanne is kind of like the latter, and Ars Magna is the former. Some of the 8s and 7s kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I want to drop Future Radio, Ginka, and like Nukitashi to 7 and raise Clover Days to 8. Honestly, anything in 7s have at least one good impact scene. This one is based on how much I enjoyed it. Sometimes there's a title that's utter dog shit, but I still have a lot of fun with it. There's no example this time around, so this one is more based to reflect this one with the more objective one that's suppressing my bias. So who knows, for some people this is more like the real tier list.